My name is Evelyn Parker and I'm 28 years old. The day of my engagement was supposed to be the beginning of forever. The day every broken piece of my past finally made sense. I remember standing in front of the mirror that morning, my fingers trembling as I adjusted the delicate silver necklace my mother had given me years before she passed away. The sunlight streamed softly through the window, painting my room in warm golden hues. Everything felt peaceful, perfect. Like life was finally apologizing for all the pain it had once put me through. I had spent months planning that evening. Every detail mattered. The soft piano melody that would welcome the guests. The pale ivory roses arranged carefully on each table. The faint scent of vanilla candles floating through the air. I wanted the night to feel like a dream. Because Daniel, the man I was about to marry, felt like a dream I never thought I deserved. He was kind, patient, understanding. He listened when I spoke, even when I didn't have the right words. He held my hand like he knew how fragile my heart really was. "You look nervous," my best friend Clara said as she leaned against the doorframe, watching me stare at my reflection for far too long. "I'm not nervous," I lied softly, forcing a small smile. "I'm just overwhelmed." "Good overwhelmed or scary overwhelmed?" she asked, walking closer, her voice gentle but curious. I hesitated. "Both," I whispered. "Because when life suddenly becomes too perfect, a small part of you starts waiting for something to go wrong." Daniel and I had met 2 years earlier at a quiet bookstore cafe. I was reaching for the last copy of a novel when our hands accidentally touched. He smiled, that calm, reassuring smile that made the world slow down for a second. We started talking about books, then life, then everything else that usually takes months to share. He told me he believed that people meet for a reason. I didn't believe him then. But somehow he became my reason. That evening, as guests filled the elegant hall with laughter and soft conversations, I could feel my heart beating louder with every passing second. My father walked beside me, his arm firm and protective, as if silently promising he wouldn't let anything ruin this moment. The lights dimmed slightly and soft golden reflections shimmered across the crystal decorations. Everything was exactly how I had imagined it. And then I saw Daniel, standing near the stage, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. He looked at me like I was the only person in the room. His eyes softened the moment our gazes met. And for a second, nothing else existed. Not the guests, not the music, just him. And the promise of a life we were about to begin. "You're breathtaking," he whispered as I reached him. "And you're late," I teased softly. "I had to make sure tonight would be unforgettable," he replied with a mysterious smile. At the time, I thought he meant the proposal speech he had been secretly working on. I had no idea. He meant something else entirely. The evening flowed beautifully. Glasses clinked in celebration, soft laughter echoed through the hall, and I could feel happiness wrapping around me like a warm embrace. Claire gave a heartfelt speech about our love story, joking about how I used to believe romance only existed in novels. My father raised a toast, his voice slightly shaking as he spoke about trust, about choosing the right person, about building a life on honesty. Honesty, that word would haunt me later. Just as Daniel was about to begin his speech, just as he reached for my hand, the sound of loud footsteps echoed across the marble floor. At first, no one noticed, but then the music stopped. The doors opened forcefully, and suddenly the room felt colder. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside, their expressions serious, eyes scanning the crowd before stopping on Daniel. "Daniel Hayes?" one of them asked firmly. Daniel's hand tightened around mine for just a second. "Yes," he replied cautiously. "I'm afraid you'll have to come with us." Silence fell so heavily that even the sound of breathing felt loud. What is happening?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The officer glanced at me briefly before speaking the words that shattered everything. "You are under arrest." The glass slipped from my hand, crashing against the floor, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot in the stunned silence. "This must be a mistake," I said quickly, my heart pounding so violently it hurt. "There has to be some misunderstanding." Daniel didn't look at me. He didn't say anything. He just slowly released my hand. And in that moment, something inside me broke in a way I didn't yet understand. Guests began whispering, phones subtly lifting, capturing the moment my perfect life collapsed in front of dozens of watching eyes. Clara stepped forward, anger flashing in her expression. "This is ridiculous. You can't just arrest someone at his engagement party." "We have a warrant," the officer replied coldly. I looked at Daniel desperately, waiting for him to explain, to laugh, to say it was all a horrible mistake. But he stayed silent. And silence can be louder than any confession. As they placed the handcuffs around his wrists, his eyes finally met mine. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Sorry for what?" My mind raced through endless possibilities. fraud, misunderstanding, mistaken identity. There was no way the man I loved, the man who knew my deepest fears, could be hiding something this serious. But as he was escorted toward the exit, I noticed something strange. He didn't look scared. He didn't look confused. He looked resigned, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. The doors closed behind him, and just like that, the celebration turned into humiliation. Whispers surrounded me like invisible knives. Did you know? What did he do? Was it money? Was it another woman? My chest tightened as the weight of judgment filled the room. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to wake up from this nightmare. Instead, I stood frozen, staring at the empty space where Daniel had been standing just moments ago. That night, I didn't cry. I couldn't because sometimes the pain is so deep. Even tears are afraid to come out. 2 days later, I would learn the truth. And the truth would destroy everything I thought I knew about love. The night after the arrest felt longer than any night I had ever lived. I sat on the cold floor of my apartment still wearing the engagement dress I once thought I would treasure forever. The soft fabric now felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if it carried the weight of humiliation stitched into every thread. My phone kept buzzing nonstop, messages from relatives, friends, even people I barely knew. Everyone had the same question. What happened? But the truth was, I didn't have an answer. I was the woman who was supposed to know him better than anyone else. Yet I felt like I had been engaged to a stranger. Clara stayed with me the whole night, sitting silently beside me as the world outside continued moving like nothing had happened. Around midnight, she finally broke the silence. Evelyn, there has to be an explanation. Her voice was careful, almost afraid to disturb the fragile state I was in. I stared blankly at the wall, replaying every moment I had ever shared with Daniel. Every smile, every promise, every soft "I love you" whispered in quiet moments. Nothing felt fake. Nothing felt forced. And that made the situation even more terrifying. What if everything was a lie? I whispered, my voice cracking under the pressure of my own thoughts. Clara immediately shook her head. No. People don't fake 2 years of their life like that, but I knew people did. The next morning, I went to the police station, my hands trembling so badly I had to hold them together just to appear calm. The officer at the reception desk looked at me with quiet sympathy, as if he had already seen too many stories like mine. I'm here to see Daniel Hayes, I said, my voice steady on the surface, broken underneath. He checked the computer briefly before nodding. You can speak with the investigator first. The word investigator sent a chill down my spine. I was led into a small gray room where a middle-aged woman sat behind a desk stacked with files. She didn't smile. She didn't look judgmental either. Just serious. You're Evelyn Parker? She asked calmly. Yes, she folded her hands together. Miss Parker, I understand this is difficult, but there are some things you need to know. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear anything else. Daniel Hayes is being investigated for financial fraud, specifically identity-based transactions connected to multiple accounts. Fraud? No. That's not possible, I said immediately, the words escaping before logic could stop them. Daniel works in corporate consulting. He barely even spends money on himself. The investigator watched me carefully, studying my reaction as if searching for hidden guilt. We have reason to believe he has been using false identities for over a year. That meant, while he was with me, the room suddenly felt smaller. You must have noticed something, she continued. Unusual calls, secret meetings, financial stress? I tried to think. Daniel did sometimes step outside to take phone calls. He did occasionally cancel plans unexpectedly. But I had never questioned him, because trust doesn't ask for proof. He told me he was working on confidential projects, I said quietly. The investigator nodded slowly, writing something down. Before leaving, she said something that echoed in my mind long after I walked out of that building. Sometimes the person we trust the most knows exactly how to avoid suspicion. I finally met Daniel that afternoon through the thick glass barrier of the visiting room. The moment he sat down across from me, I felt anger, love, confusion, and heartbreak collide violently inside my chest. Tell me it's not true, I demanded softly, my fingers gripping the edge of the table. He looked exhausted, but strangely calm. It's complicated, he replied quietly. Complicated. My entire life had just collapsed, and all he could say was complicated. Were you lying to me? I asked, my voice shaking despite my effort to remain strong. No, he said firmly, leaning closer. I never lied about loving you, that wasn't the answer I needed. Then explain everything, I whispered desperately. He hesitated, glancing briefly toward the guard standing nearby. I can't. Not yet, not yet? You're asking me to trust you, when the entire world is telling me I shouldn't, I said. tears finally escaping despite all my resistance. His eyes softened with pain. "I'm asking you to wait 2 days," he said quietly. "2 days?" I repeated, disbelief filling every syllable. "Yes, 2 days, Evelyn. Then everything will make sense." I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand the truth right there, in that cold room that smelled of fear and regret. But something in his voice, something fragile yet determined, stopped me. As I stood up to leave, he said something that made my heart sink even deeper. "No matter what you hear, don't trust Clara." I froze. Slowly, I turned back toward him. "What did you just say?" But before he could respond, the guard signaled that time was over. And just like that, I was left with a new question. Why would Daniel, the man accused of deception, warn me about the person I trusted the most? Today suddenly felt like an eternity. Because now, I didn't know who the real enemy was. The next 2 days felt unbearably heavy, as if time itself had slowed just to watch me suffer. I stopped answering calls, stopped replying to messages, stopped pretending that everything was under control. My apartment, once filled with warm laughter and future plans, now felt cold and unfamiliar. Every corner reminded me of Daniel. The way he used to leave small handwritten notes on my desk. The way he always insisted on making coffee himself because he said, I deserve to start every day gently. Those memories now felt like sharp glass pieces buried deep inside my chest. Clara refused to leave me alone during those days. She kept checking on me, bringing food I barely touched, trying to convince me that everything would eventually make sense. She spoke softly, carefully choosing words that sounded comforting. Yet something about her tone felt slightly forced. I noticed how often she asked about the police investigation, how interested she seemed in every small detail. At first, I thought she was simply worried about me, but Daniel's warning had planted a seed of doubt that refused to stop growing. That evening, while Clara was in the kitchen answering a phone call, I heard her voice drop into a whisper. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I could feel the tension in her tone. When she returned, she smiled quickly, almost too quickly, and changed the topic before I could ask anything. My heart began beating faster as an uncomfortable realization slowly formed in my mind. Doubt is dangerous, because once it enters your thoughts, every small action begins to look suspicious. Later that night, unable to sleep, I opened social media hoping to distract myself. But instead I found something that made my hands freeze on the screen. Clara had liked a news post about Daniel's arrest. Only minutes after it was published on the engagement night, minutes, while I was still in shock. While I was still standing in that hall trying to understand why my fiancé was being taken away, she was already interacting with the news online. The timing didn't feel natural. It felt prepared. The following morning, I carefully brought up the topic again, pretending I simply needed emotional support. "Do you think Daniel could really do something illegal?" I asked quietly, watching her reaction closely. Clara crossed her arms, sighing as if she had already made her decision long ago. "Evelyn, sometimes we don't truly know the person we fall in love with," she replied calmly. Her answer sounded logical, reasonable, yet completely lacking the empathy I expected from someone who claimed to care about my happiness. Her certainty felt strange, too certain. As the second day slowly came to an end, my thoughts became louder than the silence around me. I kept replaying Daniel's final words again and again. "Today's everything will make sense." I didn't know whether to trust him or hate him for leaving me in such confusion. But deep inside, I knew one thing clearly. Someone was lying, and the truth was getting closer. The second night arrived with a strange silence that felt heavier than fear itself. I sat alone in my living room, staring at the engagement ring still resting on the table where I had placed it the night. Everything fell apart. The soft golden reflection of the diamond felt almost ironic now. Something once meant to symbolize forever now looked like evidence of a carefully hidden secret. My mind kept circling around the same painful question. Why would Daniel warn me about Clara if he was the one accused of deception? Nothing felt logical anymore, yet deep inside, I could feel that the truth was slowly moving closer. Like a storm I could sense but not yet see. That evening, Clara insisted on staying again, claiming she didn't want me to be alone in such a difficult time. She spoke gently, offering emotional support, reminding me that life sometimes forces us to face painful realities. But something about her calmness felt unnatural. Most people would feel anger, shock, or confusion in such a situation. Yet Clara seemed strangely prepared, almost as if she had already accepted Daniel's guilt before any proof had been revealed. I began noticing the small details. The way her eyes avoided mine when I mentioned his name. The way she quickly changed the subject whenever I spoke about meeting Daniel again. Around midnight, Clara fell asleep on the couch while I quietly walked into the kitchen, trying to ease the restlessness inside my chest. My thoughts refused to slow down, pushing me toward a decision I never imagined I would make. I picked up Clara's phone from the table, my hands trembling as guilt mixed with desperation. I had never invaded anyone's privacy before, but nothing about my life felt normal anymore. The screen lit up instantly, revealing a recent message notification that made my heart skip painfully. "I told you she still trusts you, stay calm. Everything is working." The sender's name was saved only as an initial D for a moment. The room began spinning around me. My breathing became shallow as realization slowly began forming its terrifying shape. My fingers scrolled further, revealing more messages. Conversations that spoke about timing, about patience, about making sure I didn't suspect anything too early. Every word felt like a knife carefully carving away the last pieces of trust I still had left. Footsteps suddenly echoed behind me. "What are you doing?" Clara's voice appeared, sharp and defensive, no longer soft and comforting like before. Slowly turned toward her, the phone still in my hand, my entire body trembling under the weight of betrayal. "You tell me," I whispered, my voice breaking despite my effort to stay strong. Her expression changed instantly, the mask finally slipping. For the first time since I had known her, Clara didn't look like my best friend. She looked like a stranger. "I was trying to protect you," she said quickly, but her voice lacked sincerity. "By secretly talking to someone saved as D?" I asked, holding up the phone as proof of everything she could no longer deny. Silence filled the room again, but this time it felt dangerous. "You don't understand the full story," she said carefully, stepping closer as if trying to regain control of the situation. "Then explain it," I demanded, the pain inside my chest now slowly transforming into anger. Clara looked away briefly before speaking words that changed everything once again. "Daniel isn't who you think he is. But neither am I." My heart pounded violently as she continued. "I reported him. But not for the reasons you think." Every second felt stretched, every breath heavier than the last. Because in that moment, I realized the truth was far more complicated than simple betrayal. And whatever secret they were both hiding, I was standing right in the center of it. Clara's words hung in the air like a quiet explosion, leaving behind a silence that felt more terrifying than any argument. I stared at her, trying to recognize the same girl who once held my hand through heartbreaks and whispered that loyalty was the most important thing in any relationship. But the person standing in front of me now looked different, colder, almost unfamiliar. My chest felt tight as anger and confusion battled inside me. "You reported him?" I asked slowly, each word heavy with disbelief. Clara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she exhaled deeply as if she had been carrying this secret for far too long. "I didn't have a choice," she finally said, her voice quieter now but still defensive. "You don't know everything about Daniel." Her eyes met mine carefully, as if measuring how much truth I could handle at once. I could feel my patience slipping, my emotions reaching a breaking point. "Then tell me everything," I demanded, refusing to let her hide behind half answers anymore. The air between us felt sharp, like even the smallest word could cause permanent damage. Clara walked slowly toward the window, her arms crossed tightly as if protecting herself from her own guilt. "Before you met Daniel, I knew him," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart skipped painfully. The room suddenly felt too small, too suffocating. "Knew him how?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay strong. She hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. "We worked together 3 years ago. In a financial firm," she said. "And back then, his name wasn't Daniel Hayes." The ground beneath me felt like it had disappeared. My fingers tightened instinctively as I tried to process what she was saying. Clara continued speaking slowly, revealing pieces of a story I never imagined being part of my life. She explained that the man I knew as Daniel had once been involved in exposing a large internal corruption scheme inside the company where they both worked. Powerful people were misusing identities, moving money illegally, and destroying evidence before anyone could stop them. According to Clara, Daniel had tried to reveal the truth, but things had gone dangerously wrong. "They blamed everything on him," she said, her voice filled with a strange mixture of guilt and regret. "They needed someone to take the fall, and he was the easiest target." My mind struggled to connect the gentle, patient man I loved with the complicated reality Clara was describing. "Then why report him now?" I asked sharply. "If he was innocent, why would you help them?" Clara looked at me, her expression filled with conflict. "Because he came back," she admitted. "When I saw him with you, I panicked. I thought he was still involved in something dangerous. I thought he was lying to you the same way he lied to everyone before disappearing." Her explanation felt incomplete, but the pain in her voice sounded real. "You should have told me," I whispered, feeling betrayed in more ways than one. "I was afraid," she replied honestly. Afraid that you wouldn't believe me. Afraid that I would lose you, lose me. The irony felt cruel. Everything around me suddenly began making painful sense. The warning Daniel gave me. The strange timing of the arrest. The tension hidden beneath normal conversations. It wasn't a simple story of guilt or innocence anymore. It was a complicated web of fear, secrets, and past mistakes that had finally reached the surface. But there was still one question that refused to leave my mind. If Daniel had truly been trying to expose something dangerous, then who had really wanted him arrested? And more importantly, why now? Because deep inside, I could feel that the real truth, the most shocking part of this story, had not yet been revealed. The final truth arrived quietly, without warning, without drama. Just a single phone call that changed everything I thought I understood about love, betrayal, and justice. It was Daniel's lawyer. His voice was calm, professional, yet urgent enough to make my heart pound uncontrollably. He explained that new evidence had surfaced that morning. Evidence proving Daniel had been secretly cooperating with investigators for months. He hadn't been committing fraud. He had been helping expose the real criminals behind a network of identity-based financial manipulation. The same network that once tried to destroy his life had unknowingly allowed him to come back stronger. Every late-night phone call, every unexplained meeting, every moment of secrecy suddenly made painful sense. Daniel hadn't been living a double life to betray me. He had been protecting me from a dangerous truth that could have placed me directly in harm's way. The arrest on our engagement day had been planned. A strategic move designed to make the real culprits believe their plan was working. They needed those people to feel safe, comfortable, careless enough to reveal themselves completely. And they did. 2 days later, authorities arrested 3 senior executives connected to the original corruption case Clara had mentioned. Financial records, hidden accounts, false identities. Everything was finally exposed. Daniel's silence had not been weakness. It had been patience. His distance had not been betrayal. It had been protection. And the engagement night, the night I thought my life was collapsing, had actually been the final step in bringing the truth into the light. When I finally saw Daniel again, there were no dramatic speeches, no perfect cinematic lines, just 2 people standing in front of each other carrying the emotional weight of everything that had nearly torn them apart. His eyes looked tired, but peaceful, like a man who had spent too long fighting battles alone. I wanted to tell you everything, he said quietly. But the more you knew, the more danger you would be in. Tears filled my eyes, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming realization that trust is never truly tested when life feels easy. Trust is tested when everything falls apart, when doubt feels louder than love, when walking away feels safer than believing. You should have trusted me, I whispered, my voice shaking under the pressure of everything I had felt during those painful days. I did, he replied softly. I trusted that your heart would eventually see the truth, even if the world tried to convince you otherwise. Clara later apologized, not dramatically, not defensively, but honestly. Fear had pushed her into making decisions she thought would protect me. Yet her silence had nearly destroyed the very friendship she wanted to save. People make mistakes when they believe they are preventing pain. But sometimes, silence becomes its own kind of betrayal. Forgiveness didn't happen instantly, but understanding slowly replaced anger, and the truth created space for healing. Our story didn't end with revenge. It ended with clarity. The people responsible for the corruption faced justice through the legal system, not through hatred or destruction. Because real victory isn't about hurting those who hurt you. It's about refusing to become like them. Daniel didn't win by seeking revenge. He won by proving the truth with patience, intelligence, and courage. On my engagement day, I thought I had lost everything. But sometimes, life breaks your heart just to show you what was real all along. Sometimes betrayal reveals loyalty. Sometimes pain reveals strength. And sometimes, the person you almost stopped believing in is the very person who never stopped protecting you. Because karma doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes, it arrives as the truth.